Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today we are going to be discussing one of my all-time favorite cases of UFO occupant contact, and that is the Simonton encounter, or as Dr. Hynek remembered it, the man from Wisconsin with the pancakes. Yes, I did say pancakes and Wisconsin. Seriously, I am just so thrilled that one of my favorite cases of the weird happened in my state. And again, I know it's a weird state, but as you'll see from this upcoming story, it gets even weirder. So this case happened in Eagle River, Wisconsin, April 18th of 1961. Around 11 in the morning, Joe Simonton, a chicken farmer, was eating breakfast when he heard a noise outside which he described as sounding like knobby tires on a wet pavement. Of course, wondering what the heck of the source of this noise could be, he went outside to take a look and saw a bright silver object, about 12 feet tall and 30 feet in diameter, shaped like two inverted bowls with little exhaust pipes, the exhaust pipes about 6 or 7 inches in diameter, spaced around the rim, hovering slightly over the ground. So as he's staring at this thing, a hatch opens up in the side of it, and he looks in and sees 3 men. Not just any men, he described them as looking like Italians, each one about 5 feet tall, and wearing black turtlenecks and knit helmets. So, one of these Italian-looking UFO occupants, closest to the hatch, passes a container out to Simonton that appears to be made out of the same material as the craft itself, and somehow conveyed that they needed water. It's interesting because I've listened to one interview with Simonton, and of course he was interviewed many times by many different people, and it's never entirely sure whether this communication was telepathic or simply body language. But however it was, he understood that they needed water. So Simonton, and this is just, again, Wisconsin's a weird state, but this is just cliche weird. It's like, okay, there's this, for lack of a better term, flying saucer, this craft hovering outside of my house. There's these Italian-looking occupants inside, and they're asking for water, and Simonton is just like, hey, sure thing, man. Let me get you that. And that's exactly what he did. He went inside, got the water, and came back out. Now, when he came back over with the water, he was able to get a better view of the inside of the ship, and he said that the interior was dark, about the color of wrought iron. There was no discernible light source, which is common with people who see the inside of UFOs. And it was filled with instrument panels, and there was this generator-like hum present. But not only that, one of these entities appeared to be frying something on a flameless grill. So Simonton motioned that he was just interested in what this guy was doing, and perhaps mistakenly thinking that he wanted a sample, one of these entities, who was dressed alike to the other two but had a slight difference, he had red trim on his pants, handed him 3 of the now infamous alien pancakes. So then this entity closest to Simonton attached some sort of hook to a belt on his clothing, and I guess sort of moved away as the hatch closed. And when the hatch closed, it left absolutely no impression on the side of the object, which rose 20 feet and then kind of took off in a southern direction, apparently even bowing some of the nearby pine trees. Now, Simonton contacted the sheriff, a man who, at this point in time, he had known for 14 years. And this is a really good spot to mention that Simonton was really well respected in his community. He wasn't the sort of person that would be making stuff like this up for attention or fame. And like many witnesses, he says that after the whole thing, the media frenzy that ensued, he really wished that he hadn't come forward with his experience at all. Because not only was there a police investigation, but there was an Air Force investigation as well. J. Allen Hynek actually was involved with this investigation, and Hynek is an interesting study in and of himself, and that whole thing is just such a can of worms, because he worked with projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book, and was even the person to utter the infamous swamp gas statement. But the gist of it is that after so many years of looking at the UFO problem, he really came to the conclusion that there was something to it after all. And I'd say he'd started out kind of more as a skeptic, but yeah, definitely as he worked through so many of these cases, it became apparent to him that there's more than, misidentification or mental imbalance to a lot of sightings. So anyway, in the case of the Simonton encounter, however, the official Air Force conclusion was that Simonton had inserted a waking dream on the reality around him. And here's the trick, is that this idea suited both conventional scientists, who typically really don't want much to do with the UFO problem in general, and the hardcore ufologists, who always have a hard enough time appearing legit without such problems as interstellar breakfast foods. And the big nail in this coffin is unfortunately the pancakes themselves. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's a picture of Simonton holding the pancakes, and I'm not going to lie, they don't even really look like pancakes. They look awful. They're these they're about this big, these porous sort of, I don't know, hard cracker-like objects. And, you know, they look terrible. Apparently they were. Simonton, barring any concerns about radiation or alien viruses or anything, actually ate one and said that it tasted like cardboard. So Simonton tried one, and then he sent another one out to be tested by the Food and Drug Laboratory of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And I'll cut the suspense. The pancakes came back as ordinary terrestrial materials. So this brings up somehow even more questions than the simple fact of alien pancakes, because if we are to believe Simonton's encounter, which, barring the Air Force, explanation, in every official capacity, he proved to be a legitimate witness who really believed in what he had observed and experienced, and honestly had evidence, trace evidence in the form of these pancakes to boot, then why were they made out of earthly materials? I mean, did the aliens just, drop in, pop out to the store, grab some Crisco and wheat bran and buckwheat hulls and fry up some pancakes? It just really doesn't make any sense. So it is a really funny thing to note, but when I first came across this encounter, I was very much into the strictly flesh and blood extraterrestrial biological entity theory for UFO occupant encounters. And that being said, when I heard that the Air Force was involved, the only explanation I could find for the pancakes coming back as being of earthly materials was, you probably guessed it, cover-up. This is the biggest news since Roswell, the case of the alien pancakes. And that's kind of the issue using conventional models, is the further along you get on any line of reasoning, honestly, the more ridiculous it tends to become. And barring anything else, you still have the question of, do aliens eat pancakes? There's also the issue of how, like in many reports, they had no sort of protective gear on. They were wearing just turtleneck two-piece suits and knit caps. I mean, how do they breathe our air or exist in our atmosphere? And if they were prepared enough to have ingredients, why did they need the water from Joe Simonton? Really, to look at the Simonton case in its totality is to see patterns of a very much older phenomenon, that of fairy lore. Many people make connections between current UFO occupant encounters and fairies, in so much as to say that what people used to consider fairies are, get this guys, actually aliens. And, we were mistaken, what we thought were elves, fairies, gnomes, the good folk, the gentry, whatever you want to call it. No, that's not it. They're actually space aliens. We just couldn't get that back in the Dark Ages. That's why we came up with this fairy lore. But now we got it. Marvin, we got your number. It's actually those crafty aliens with their spacecraft. However, I always kind of get to this point then where I wonder what it's going to be called when the current model of UFO occupants from other planets becomes outdated. Because really, currently, there's a problem. I shouldn't say most, but many different sightings of this, what we consider a single phenomenon, don't fit this current model. I mean, using only the Eagle River incident as an example, we have many of the problems easily presented here. When Joe Simonton was handed pancakes from supposedly another world, or occupants of another world, why were they made out of buckwheat and soybean hulls and hydrogenated oil? Why were the radiation readings normal? Why did they need water? Why did they give him food? Why did he come into contact with beings that looked like Italians instead of, I don't know, crystalline silicon-based life forms or something like that? I mean, even if you subscribe to the idea that mankind was either planted or altered by similar life forms, the possibility of them breathing our air and drinking our water, it really doesn't make that much sense. And even if they could, then I have serious concerns as to why such a seemingly or supposedly advanced society, if they created us and apparently are concerned with us, spend their time handing out pancakes to chicken farmers and common earth rocks to farm wives. It doesn't neatly follow this idea of the alien presence model that has been popular for most of this past century and what fits our frame of reference for this time. Yet Simonton was a reliable witness. All of these things that don't make sense and points that don't add up are present in his encounter, which pretty much everyone who investigated it claims he believed he experienced, and he had physical evidence to back that up. I mean, it can't follow, yet if we dedicate ourselves to really understanding the problem of UFO encounters, we kind of have to follow it. So, this whole case is covered extensively in Passport to Magonia, which of course was Jacques Vallée's groundbreaking book about the ties between fairy lore and current alien encounters, and Keel discussed this in some length in most of his works as well. And surprisingly enough, the point that really launches the Simonton encounter right into fairyland is the famous Flapjacks. For some bizarre reason, baked goods feature prominently across mythologies and religions worldwide. I mean, from the importance of unleavened bread in the Judeo-Christian traditions to many documented encounters of fairies giving people all manner of bakery items across Europe, for some reason there seems to be a special connection between specifically flat cakes and supernatural encounters. And again, this was covered in Passport to Magonia. Ridiculous as it sounds, a very well-documented case of what was considered demonic torment in the 1600s began with a mysterious pancake. So this also kind of brings up a point that Keel uncovered, which is that most contactees, people who believe they're being contacted by other intelligences or outside influences, have a high starch diet. And another aside to Keel's work is another anomaly from the pancakes, and that is the absence of salt. So, as was pointed out in Passport to Magonia, there is a precedent in fairy lore for that fairies cannot eat or do not like salt. On the flip side, however, through Keel's work, we have many reports of the men in black downright devouring salt. The strange case covered in the Mothman prophecies was one even asked for salt to take a pill. So, as we eventually get to with all of these different encounters, what does it all mean? I mean, here you have Simonton's entities, which came from the sky in an object that looks a heck of a lot like what we consider to be a flying saucer, giving him unsalted pancakes, thus in line with the older tradition of fairy lore. To the opposite point, you have the decidedly unearthly men in black, also known to come down from the sky in flying saucers in addition to their black Cadillacs, making a point to request salt. I mean, in trying to establish patterns between these two different types of phenomena, these two different entities, it's almost as though points arise simply to confound other points. Another bizarre point is the request for help, or the implication that help is needed. This is a really huge commonality between current paranormal encounters and fairy lore. I mean, it's easy enough to see even in fairy tales, and the current model of UFOs crash landing also fits this theme. Even religious apparitions like Our Lady of Guadalupe often fall into this category as well. And it gets even creepier. I've read cryptid reports where people are under the assumption that the literal monster that they are looking at needs help or is somehow hurt or injured, and they want to go help it. It's to the point where this seems like more than just your basic human empathy. It seems like to be a genuine impression somehow attached to these sightings. So I guess the point here, amid all these contradictions and paradoxes and pancakes, is that while Simonton's encounter is considered an outlier in the current model of UFO sightings, it's most certainly not in regards to a far older model of contact. And again, I really do. I just wonder what people will call it a couple hundred years from now when we're being laughed at for calling these entities aliens and extraterrestrials. So, with that said, I'm just another tinfoil hat, signing off. Not quite. So, I just wanted to let everyone know that if you'd like to catch me talking all things Keel, you can tune into the High Strangeness Factor hosted by Steve Ward from yesterday's date, the 22nd, on the Paranormal UK radio network. And if you'd be interested in seeing me brave the ghost of Bloody Mary, please check out Supernatural Dares with Chad Lewis. Now, signing off.
Do